Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Astro Alchemy. I'm Sarah, and I'm with Lora, and we are your hosts for our weekly show where we discuss the current gate and or gene key that the sun is moving through, and then also the transits, the astrology transits as they relate to both the human design and the kind of astrological perspective. So yeah, we just talked about what key was it last week?
18.
We just talked about 18 and now we're moving into 48. And yeah, we're excited to also touch on the full moon that's going to be happening on October 9th. Laura, is there anything else that you want to touch on?
Ironically, yes and no. I thought of something earlier today that I wanted to bring up at the beginning of our episode, and I completely forgot what it was. Maybe it'll come back to me. I feel like it's something like logistic, not necessarily related to the material at hand, but something about like the podcast, or I don't know. Don't know what it was. So maybe we'll get a random insight. Maybe we won't.
Maybe we will. Okay, so well, if that pops in, just go ahead and blurt it out. Okay, cool. So do you want to pull up the human design chart of the moment?
Sure. Well, this is the astrology, but the human design chart of the moment, we have the sun in gate 48, which is, well, here, if we go to the gene keys page, it'll tell us what degrees of Libra it is, 9 to 15 degrees of Libra. That's where the sun is. The earth opposite of the sun is in 21 degrees, and that's creating a lovely little channel here. Mars in 21 and, oh no, the earth in 21 and Mars in 45. That channel is defining our throat center. Sorry if you're listening to this and not watching the screen. That channel is defining our throat center to our heart / ego / willpower center. It has all those different names. The sun in 48 is over here on this side, the left side of the screen, in the spleen. It's part of that logical circuitry that we were focused on yesterday, because that energy is part of the same kind of dynamic. We have 18 defined also currently by Venus, but that energy moves from the root up through the spleen, through 18, through 48, up towards the throat in 16. Is there anything that stands out to you recently? This is like more of a different transit thing, but Saturn moved last night, sometime in the past 12 hours, something like that, into gate 13. And I say that,
Interesting.
I say that because I am personally impacted by that transit, because I have gate 19. So if you're someone with gate 19, you may have noticed a shift. However, the moon is now in 49, so like the moon snuck in to replace Saturn. So if like it's less strong, but it's still there after the moon, like if you're listening to this on a day that this is not being recorded, the moon won't be in this gate anymore. So you'll feel the impact of 49 no longer being active. But anyways, I say it because it affects me personally, but yeah, that's one of the other major changes. And it's a slower moving transit, but 48 is the necessary and qualitative foundation that is a prerequisite to establish the common good. It's also known as the gate of depth, and currently it's in line, the sun's in line 4, which is called restructuring, and it's exalted here. So like I said last week, if you're on genetic matrix, I think it was last week, if you're on genetic matrix, regardless of what time I said it, if a planet is in its exaltation or detriment, only that aspect will show up. So we only have the written form here for the sun being exalted, which is the good sense to take advantage of restriction on short-term activity to assess the situation and restructure for long-term goals that will facilitate development when activity resumes. It's a long sentence, Rob. The awareness that depth and its possible expression will face restrictions with the resulting taste for short-term projects. It feels like the connection between longevity and short-term energy. Anywho, do you want me to explain it from the gene keys side or the human design side?
There's a couple things I want to touch on. For one, the 4521 is a manifesting channel. So right now, collectively, well, what can we expect from a manifesting channel, Laura?
Probing internal compulsion to initiate, I'd say,
Nice.
especially when it comes to money. 4521 is called the money line. It deals with resources within a tribe and the dictation of where those resources go and what they're used for and how they're used. But with the ego center defined, I told Sarah this, I noticed it as soon as it happened. And I usually have these like contemplative thoughts in the shower. And so I was thinking about desire and wanting and how we get into moments where we clearly know what we want. And then there's moments that we don't know what we want and we're stuck in this possibility zone. But when we know what we want and it's like the body's desire, you can feel it. The body knows what it needs to experience or what it wants to experience. And then the mind can like observe that and be on board with it. But if the mind wants something and it's the mind's desire, it's more likely like an ego mind fear mechanism of like, I think I want this because I should want this, or I think I want this because if I don't have this, then XYZ will happen and then I won't be safe or then I won't be secure. And the ego just tries to keep us safe. And so those desires are not the kind of desires I'm talking about, but like when the body wants something, it has, with the ego center defined, like this willpower comes to pursue that goal or to pursue that desire. And so as soon as this transit went into effect, I could feel it. I could feel desires in my body that before I just didn't want. And all of a sudden I could identify with wanting things and being willing to do what it takes to pursue them. However, big important note, it's temporary. If you don't have a defined willpower center or throat center, then it's not going to last forever. And so don't be hard on yourself. Like when this energy dissipates or when your motivation just suddenly collapses, there's nothing wrong with you. You're perfectly okay. It's just a temporary transit that we have that lends us the support of like pursuing goals if you know what your goals are. But even like you don't have to have it. The thought came to my mind even before I knew this transit was happening. When I was still contemplating it in the shower, was our temporary transits that we get through the current astrological movements, they're like having the ability to turn on an appliance. Like say in your kitchen, you have different appliances. I speak because personal experience with Mercury retrograde wreaking havoc on ours. Like you have a microwave, you have a refrigerator, you have an oven. Just because you have access to turn on the oven doesn't mean you need to bake anything or you want to bake anything. Just because you have like a brick wooden whatever pizza, like one of those fancy pizza ovens outdoors, doesn't mean you have to bake pizza 24/7 in your fancy outdoor wood burning pizza oven. With these transits, just because the light switch is turned on and they're plugged into the power doesn't mean that you have to do anything with them. And I don't like that statement at all. It's not about wanting to do something with them. It's your body doing something or not doing something, regardless of what your mind thinks it wants to be doing. It's not up to the mind at all. Either that energy is plugged in and your body's going to use it because it's correct for your body to use it, or that energy is plugged in and your body has no need for that energy. And so it's not going to do anything with it. But it's just fun to observe and fun to identify with the energies. But yeah, that's my analogy, like the accessibility of an appliance. Sometimes you want to use it, sometimes you don't. Just because, another thing is like, just because you've been waiting for an appliance to be able to like function, you wait for that energy, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work in the way you want it to. Like say with this willpower center, say you've been waiting for a moment to like have willpower to pursue a specific goal. When this energy comes, just because this motor is defined and you know how access to this motor and this energy doesn't mean it's going to work the way you want it to work, or it's correct for it to work the way you want it to work. It is what it is. You have no choice. Welcome to the game of human design. But yeah, that's my long spiel on 2145.
Okay, I think that was actually good and necessary too, though, because this channel is defined, because it has to do with the current Sun Earth alignment, and also Mars, which is still in Gemini and will be until January. So this is not the last time that Mars is going to be on these degrees. And then my only other thing, just from the human design astrology perspective, before we jump into 48 on the gene keys side, is you said that Saturn just went into 13. It's retrograded back into 13 from 49. How do we feel about that switch from 49 being defined consistently to 13 being defined by Saturn?
I feel like it's up to each person to identify with the transit or not. It's very broad to say, how do we feel? Because as a collective, we have our own relationship to each of these degrees. So like it depends. Do you have 33 defined? Like Sarah, you have 33 defined. So currently Saturn is giving you, but you have G centered. If you don't know Sarah's chart, she has 31, 8, and 33 defined, which are in the throat center, reaching down towards the G center. And so right now she's having 2 G center channels in definition, 8-1 and 33-13. So it's just another flavor for this energy of looking for direction or love or a sense of identity, a different quality to how you're experiencing the transit of the G center for yourself. Again, similar idea here, just because you have access to direction doesn't mean it's correct to initiate and pursue a direction, or just because you might have a sense of where you want to go in life right now, it doesn't mean that direction is going to be permanent and, you know, your path into the future. It might be, who knows, but it's not like 100% for sure forever, because transits are temporary. But that's the program. The matrix is to be conditioned by transits. But in terms of, yeah, I mean, for me, I am personally impacted by it too, because I have gate 19 and 49, I feel has been interfering with my diet and how I eat. 1949 has different names. One is bridegroom, another is like the butcher, and I guess the animal that's being butchered, the butchie. It deals with sacrifice and the way in which we take in resources into our body to a certain degree. And like, I've had a weird relationship with food for the past couple weeks. I hope that's going to change with 49 no longer being active. But like personally, again, for me, I don't have a defined emotional solar plexus in my chart. So 49 was giving me emotional definition. And so I was experiencing a synthetic, let's say, wave of emotions for the past 2 months. I think it's been like 2 months. But just because 49 for me is no longer active, when the moon moves out of it, I'm still having emotional definition, because Mercury is in 6 and I have 59. So I'm still having emotional definition from a different channel. So it's hard to say, like, know your own chart. Go to geneticmatrix.com and look up your own chart so you can see what is currently being activated by different planets. Because just because we say, oh yeah, everyone's gonna plug into empathy now, doesn't mean that's necessarily the case, like for each individual. And I say that because empathy is the quality of gate 13. I don't know, maybe you have a different opinion, Sarah.
No. I guess like my main question was like, you know, gate 13 in general mixed with like the Saturnine influence energy. But you know, if you're listening to this on Spotify, I would highly recommend looking at our YouTube, because you're going to be able to see the chart that we're talking about and really be able to put see where the lines are in the body graph in real time. But no, I don't think I have anything to add. We can move on to gene keys if you're ready.
Yeah, but I can focus on 48 first from the human design perspective. When I was reading, well, I wasn't reading it, I was listening to Gene Key 48, the audiobook. It's not narrated by Richard Rudd. He has a different narrator for it. And I have 2 deaf gates. There's 3 deaf gates, and likewise 3 deaf channels in human design, and 43, 38, and 39. Or is it 23, 38, and 39? It's 43 or 23, the deaf gate. The whole channel is by consequence deaf because of it having 1 deaf gate, but no, I don't know. I think it's 43.
I think it's 43 because I have 2 of them and I have the 38.
Okay, so we have this saved to deaf gates. Sometimes with deaf gates, if you have them or the channel, like you just can't hear what someone's telling you. It's a protection mechanism because you're not supposed to hear what they're telling you. And so I was trying to listen to 48, and like I don't mind the narrator for all the other chapters, but I could not. It was like just nothing penetrated into my skull from the chapter. So I had to listen instead to Richard Rudd's audio contemplation, which I love, especially for this particular gene key. So my wisdom, that's not my wisdom, my knowledge is going to come from that source, not the book, not the Gene Keys book. But from the human design perspective, this gate is the gate of depth or the well. And it's, like I said, part of logical circuitry, which is where we were last week with the sun moving through 18. And the heart of, I feel like we've harped on, continuing to use that word, I feel like we've focused on very heavily abstract circuitry because we've had so many abstract activations recently with the sun's movement through certain gates and channels. And so now with this focus on logical, I feel like it needs its own attention, which is to say that logical is about, if we think about how circuitry is set up, abstract circuitry moves through the emotional solar plexus. So it moves through our emotional system and our feelings and our experiences and how we process that within ourselves. And logical circuitry moves through the spleen, which has to deal with survival and instinct. And so I feel like a lot of logic, the energy within the logical system and circuit deals with wanting to maintain the human race, wanting to maintain consistency to ensure that we're all going to survive and we're all going to be okay. Which I chuckle because if you know, I've been listening to rave cosmology, which is to say we're all going to die. Woohoo! There's no point to focus on the longevity of our species because it has an expiration date. But in this context, Gate 48 deals with the fear of inadequacy and how the energy moves from 18 to 48. So 18 is the energy of correction, noticing what needs to change, and 48 offers the depth of seeing deep down everything and how it can be fixed and the awareness that's necessary to make the adequate changes. And then the energy moves into the throat through 16, which is the gate of skills. And this whole channel is the channel of the wavelength or design of talents. And I particularly, I happen to have it. I want to say happen to, but particular came out. I happen to have this channel, which now saying that makes me laugh again because you think your girl would have some skill at eloquence and she does not. Anywho, this gate is also known as the gate of black magic. 11 is known for white magic, and not to say like evil magic, dark referring to matter and form, and 11 with white magic referring to light and energy. But with this concept of magic, I'll just say Ra has said that it's not that humans do magic, but magic moves through us and uses us as a vessel through which to express itself. So I feel like people with 48 and 18 can be a vessel for magic, or people with mystical circuits, but these aren't part of the mystical circuits. Anyways, side note, what I want to say is that this gate has a tendency to really, I wrote down a quote, it tends to seek itself through its opposite. That's not, I'll just read the quote. It tries to be what it's not. No other gate is as driven by the potential conditioning of its polarity. In that, the 48 seeks skill. 16 is the energy, not the energy because it's a throat center, but it's the emphasis we put on skill and practicing certain things to develop skill, to develop talent, to then express that out into the world. It's the idea that like you have to dedicate 7 years of something to just learn it and then another 7 years to master it. And so 48 thinks, I have all this stuff within me. Like if I just work on it, if I just practice, if someone just recognizes me, then I can externalize it and get it out there. And so like it's a gate that really, really strongly seeks external recognition because there's all this stuff under the surface that wants to get out. This idea of the well, I feel like, is similar to right-mindedness in human design, because Ra also refers to that energy as being a well of having so much depth, and you don't really know what's inside of you if you have a right mind configuration in your variables. You don't know what's in you, and so you have to wait for someone else to come to you as a well to pull it out, for them to, you know, put a bucket in you and see what will come out. And it's based on who they are that what comes out of you changes. But with 48 as a gate, there's depth, and because of that depth, because it's a splenic gate, there's a strong fear of inadequacy, of not knowing enough, of not being secure enough, but it's for the sake of propelling one into the future for survival. I think that's it from the human design side. If something else comes to mind, I'll share it. But on the gene key side, again, shadow of inadequacy, gift of resourcefulness, and city of wisdom. Sorry, I can't make the screen calm down. And it's part of the codon ring of matter, which we mentioned these past 2 weeks, because 46 is part of the codon ring of matter, and so is 18. Those were the previous two gene keys. The next one's 57, and it's also part of the codon ring of matter. Its programming partner, like we said earlier, is 21, because that's where the Earth is. And for the two shadows, it's the repressive shadow of being bland and the reactive shadow of being unscrupulous. And the second title is the wonder of uncertainty. And so, yeah, the stuff I have to say is from the contemplation, not the book. And all the gates in the spleen have to do with certain levels of fear, but same with the emotional solar plexus and the ajna. All the three awareness centers have qualities of fear to them within all the gates. And yet I feel like this particular gate gets an extra emphasis for being a fearful gate. We talked about gate 18, and we didn't emphasize the energy that it's a fear gate, right? With 18, there's like an energy of correctness and judgment, but it's a fear that's not super internalized that we identify with. When we have gate 18, we tend to externalize it. But with 48, there's a tendency to identify with and internalize the fear that's there. And it's the fear of not knowing enough, or not being enough, or not having enough experience to be able to get that energy to the throat, because this energy just wants to externalize itself through the throat, through gate 16. And so it's going to harp on and really focus on everything that it doesn't know rather than what it does know. So there's this really deep identification with fear. And then when it comes to resourcefulness, when we realize that there is so much depth to us that we do or don't know. Hold on 1 second, Sarah, you take over for a second. I'm being interrupted.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about what Ra said about it when I was reading the Line Companion, and he said something along the lines of that basically, like, people who have this gate, and I don't know if he had it or if he was just talking about his photographic mind in general, but like he'll remember things that like are just not even relevant. It's like you don't get to pick and choose what information is in the well. Like 90% of it could be like completely irrelevant, just like information gleaned from like just living your life that you may never use again. But it's just the essence of like of all of the information that could be, just like the well is deep and dark and you don't know how low it goes. So is this key. There's like a bottomless pit quality to it, which like Richard Rudd said, there's a level of fear that's inherent to it because it's just basically it's darkness embodied. It's the devouring feminine energy just being swallowed up by all of this stuff, all this information. And he goes on to talk about it more. Are you still being interrupted? Do you want to finish your thought?
Good. Now, to answer your question, Ra does have it in his Neptune, so it's on both his design and personality side, and it's just the hanging gate, just 48 without 16. Yeah, I'll have to remember where I was though with my thought process.
No,
Resourceful. Yeah, you don't know what's in you. And part of what Ra said was that some of it can be really trivial and not have really any consequence, and some of it can be extremely valuable. But the thing is, you don't know what's inside of you. And so part of it being a projected channel, it's not connected to a motor. It needs recognition to come out. So it needs someone else to call on it and say, hey, I think you have some wisdom inside of you. Let's pull it out. Or what do you have to say? But because of that, because it wants to get to the throat, it just really wants someone to pull that information out of it. And because it needs the other, it tries to like work on it on its own. And so it's gonna say, I'm gonna work on this, I'm gonna work on this, I'm gonna work on this, thinking that if it does that enough, then it can finally externalize what it has to say. But you can dig yourself into the ground that way. Like what matters is being recognized and having someone notice that you are well and you have wisdom within you. But in terms of, like you said, with the feminine, Richard Rudd really goes into such beautiful detail within the city of this gene key about wisdom and the contemplation, at least, how it's one of the two most yin gene keys, the other being gene key number 2. And that the heart of this shadow is the dilemma of not knowing. And when we get caught up in not knowing something, and we identify with not knowing it, then we can pull ourselves into the shadow. But if we embrace what we don't know and treat it as possibility and mystery, then like the true essence of wisdom can come out. And with wisdom, it's not knowledge. Knowledge, you take in all the information and you understand it. With wisdom, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. And all of a sudden something comes out and it's wise and it's beautiful in that nature, but you can't force wisdom and you can't, try to manipulate it to exist. It's there or it isn't. And he spoke about like the divine feminine with so many females, like mothers and grandmothers, who've acquired wisdom through their process of birthing children in that depth. That's where so much of our collective wisdom comes from. And yet so many of our spiritual masters are men. And he said it's because, already all women have this gene key essentially, so we're all wise. But for a man to go down this feminine path, for a man to embrace his not knowing, he becomes like a spokesperson or like an embodiment of it. And it's more noticeable because it's against his nature of being, these are my words, not Richard's, but against his nature of being like a masculine force. To embrace the feminine, you get noticed for that. So anyways, I like this gene key. I have it and I strongly identify with inadequacy, but I really like it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can definitely tell that you have this channel. It's part of, many of your, I feel like, deeply feminine qualities in the human design chart. And it's interesting that the 48 is in Libra, where the 2 is in Taurus, right? So we're thinking about Venus from the astrological perspective. And the other thing with this is just that, like, Marianne Woodman talks about something called, which I said before, but the devouring mother archetype. And it's basically this energy of being so weighed down by information or matter or whatever the thing is that you can't ever get your ideas off the ground. And so when I'm thinking about the 48, at least on the fear side, because he goes into the concept of people who are sheep, which he says most people are sheep because what they're doing is they're living this kind of surface level life, putting band-aids on their dissatisfaction or comforting themselves, self-soothing themselves in ways without actually getting to the bottom of what it is they are and what it is that they want. And so they end up just kind of being run by the states or systems, fear-based propaganda, information, whatever it is, that keep people controlled. And that's where the bland quality of the shadow side comes from, whereas the unscrupulous quality comes from the side of people who are the ones who are manipulating the fear of the masses, because they have their own fear, and the way that they deal with their fear is by manipulating other people. And so it's two sides of the same coin. There's people who honestly want to be giving their power away because they don't know what to do with the responsibility of having to take care of their own, like ultimately their own desires, and beyond desires, just like their own life, and what it is to what it means to be them. So yeah, I think this is it's relatable to the feminine, but then I also see how it's playing out in popular culture, just in the sense of the shadow, because it really does feel like, and I think Richard Rudd says this, or maybe it's not Richard Rudd, but there's this shallowness to it. There's this lack of luster to people who are in the shadow of the 48, and it's all because of the deepest fear. So yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I had from. We talked about inadequacy. Oh, and then the other thing I wanted to mention was just that the wisdom is inherent to like the pattern that's underlying everything. And it has to do with this like embodied movement within your life that's from your body and not from your mind, which we harp on about constantly, getting embodied and being more in alignment with your physical vessel than allowing your not self to run the show. So, it talks about how this wisdom has to do with the perfection of the timing of your life. And, that's the pattern. That's like the underlying pattern that is holding everything together. That's basically like this beautiful fractal structure that's moving everyone's lives forward perfectly based on their own unique design. So I think that, on the shadow side, of course, there's the bland and unscrupulousness, but then, and this is just on the gift side, but it's just that basically that perfection of timing when you're working with it properly, and this like naturalness of information just being able to pour out of you when the mood strikes or when the timing's right. So yeah, so those are some of the things that I wrote down for it. And also, oh yeah, one more thing. I'm like the difference between insecurity and insecure and unsecure. He talks about this, and he just talks about the fact that like ultimately like our fears because we're insecure about things. But the wisdom of this is about knowing that you're unsecure, which is different than being insecure, because the unsecure is kind of like falling into the abyss and figuring out that it's a feather bed. And I think that was actually a quote by Terence McKenna. But the insecure is when you're super afraid constantly, and you're like doing all these fear-based things because you feel like something's wrong inherently in the structure. But the unsecure is deeply feminine, because like we don't have any control, and like all we can do is surrender, and like all we can do is hang out with our own fear and like look at it instead of trying to come up with all of these mental not self reasons that we're afraid. So yeah, so those are the things that I pulled out from the chapter. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah. So along the lines of fear, in the audio contemplation, Richard Rudd talks about a moment when he was living in the Highlands and he was challenged to jump into a lake that was part of some waterfalls in a glen. And as he was like at the top, I think he said it was like a 10-meter jump, he felt fear kind of paralyze him in that moment. And he really strongly identified with this sense of fear from this Gene Keys perspective, because he's bringing it up. And his body jumped anyways. And I think that's part of the process of like when we have fear, especially with the defined spleen. I mean, I guess it's different if you have an undefined spleen, but the defined spleen protects you because it knows what the body can and can't handle. in terms of safety. So like in terms of being unsecure, you'll have fears that will say, don't do this, this isn't good for you, out of a protection mechanism to actually save your life or save you from danger that would be harmful to your survival. And when it's this other level of fear that's like there because you're feeling fear, but it's also part of the mind wants to protect you, then when it's correct, the body will move, the body will jump, when you trust it and when you surrender to it. But it's like you have to know which it is. Is it the fear that's like, don't jump, it's a very shallow pool and you're gonna hurt yourself? Or is it, don't jump because you don't know what's within the pool? Not very helpful. It's up to you to trust your body to know if it's protecting you or misguiding you. But there is that. Another thing is with this ring of codon ring of matter, this gene key partakes of the emotional sphere within the Venus sequence and the 8 to 14 year period of our life. So I looked it up because we weren't sure last week which one was 46. 46 was 0 to 7, and then 18.
Okay, so it was.
But they're not consecutive. So 46, which is the first gene key we covered within this codon ring of matter, was 0 to 7. And then 18 was 14 to 21 or 15 to 21. And now we're back to the middle of 7 to 14 or 8 to 14. And then 57 is when we're in utero, in the womb. But each of these parts of our life are associated with a sphere within the Venus sequence. And so this one is associated with the emotional intelligence quotient, the EQ. 18 is with the IQ, 46 is with the SQ, and the 57 is the core wound. I'm pretty sure that's how those are all laid out. And within the audio contemplation, Richard says, like, go to the Venus sequence if you're at all identified. He's like, I never, tried to promote myself, but like, this is the moment using to promote myself. Go do the Venus sequence. So I'm passing that promotional self plugin from Richard to you. Go look at your Venus sequence.
Nice.
And it just makes you think about our level of fear and inadequacy and how that plays a role in our emotional development as we're like coming into puberty and learning about ourselves in different ways.
Yeah.
It's rather significant.
Well, yeah, definitely is. And I think that, he talks about how, your parents are imprinting this onto you, this like, whatever it is that however they deal with it is getting imprinted onto you. And I think it was a really important piece of information of like, you have to trust your body, because I think so many of us don't trust our bodies, and we're like learning how to trust them because we've lived in a world where the mental plane is the one that is on a pedestal. And, I feel like for me right now, it's been very much this lesson of like trusting my body, like with my roller skating and things like that. If you're in your head, you ruin it. Ra was talking in the Line Companion about juggling and how you think with juggling that you need to be like constantly thinking and coordinating with your mind, but like realistically, your body's what's able to juggle. And so there's this like just natural quality of being able to juggle things that human beings, well, probably some human beings have, and maybe others don't, but like it's never about thinking about it. It's just that once you do it, it becomes like your body knows exactly how to catch the next ball. And if you just keep paying attention to the next ball, it just it keeps going. So I mean, that's probably an interesting thing to learn how to do, because in the beginning, of course, there's going to be some level of thinking about it, but once you get the hang of it, it's probably very second nature. And I feel like with the 48, we're really looking at those types of physical reactions that you have to things, and trusting the body just with your like actually with your life, instead of again thinking that you need to control it. I feel like we go on and on about surrender and the feminine and all of those things. So
well, that brings up my final point, which I think it's really ironic that this gene key is so feminine and all about surrender when it's part of logical circuitry.
I know.
And we associate logic with the masculine energy of like trying to find an answer. But it goes back to what you were saying about like finding that flow state. it's similar to the serendipity, but the heart, or not the heart, the like origin of the abstract and logical circuits are from the root to the sacral. It's format energy. How is the energy being formatted? And 952 is the logic format, and it's like, let's focus and be still and look at all the little details so that we can lay out the foundation for the plan, for the process, to figure out like, how are we going to do this thing? How are we going to look for the patterns? How are we going to process all this information that we're going to process? It's like the very first, like, let's map out an outline and let's like be very still and strategic about it. And then that energy moves through the sacral into gate 5, which is about flow, which is about being in union with the earth and the seasons. And so it's interesting that the logic like finds this rhythm to it, even though it's like, you know, scientific and mathematical and all this stuff. It finds a rhythm to it because it's connected to like this flow state of earth, of everything having a season, of everything having a proper pace at which it needs to be conducted. And so I feel like that energy also kind of relates to the stream key of like finding your pace and finding your flow, but it's part of the logical circuitry. So
yeah, well,
how it is.
I wouldn't expect anything less for a key that's within the masculine cardinal air sign of Libra.
Yeah, right. It's so dualistic.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's where you see like, this is Venus's logical domain in a sense. So just interesting to think about.
Well, most of the spleen is Venus. I'm pretty sure all of, I mean, we can look at it here.
Yeah, so that is, I didn't know that.
Venus, I mean, not Venus, just kidding, Libra. I meant to say Libra. Actually, no, so 46 is in the G center, but then 18, 48, 57, 32, 50, and it goes off into Scorpio, but that's all the spleen. 18, 48, 57, 32, 50, 28, 44 are all the spleen. And so the spleen's domain is here in Libra and Scorpio.
Wow.
It's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Good to note. Definitely good to note, because that's something that I think about. Okay, well, do you have anything else you want to add about 48?
I don't think so, other than I'm insecure. Please recognize me.
I feel like I recognize you. Maybe I should do it more though, because I definitely feel like you have the quality of being able to achieve mastery over things. That
I have gate 16. But 16 also needs to be everybody. 16 also needs to be recognized. So it's just, I'm saying insecure, please recognize me.
Yes, we recognize you because you're a giant well of information that's just constantly sharing everything that you possibly know about something. And I'm always like, oh my gosh, like I thought I had a photographic memory, and then you start talking and I'm like, oh my goodness. So that's
well, I don't even have a photographic memory, but like it's nothing. I was thinking about this earlier, like the things we get complimented on as human beings, right? People, you know, recognize us for certain things, and like I get complimented, like just Sarah just did, for my mind or for my ability to conceptualize certain solutions or answers to things. But that is just mechanical. Like that's not the soul embodying the body. That's the body. Like the body could use the brain and conceptualize. It's like my eyes are blue. I have 5 fingers. Like, okay, it's not very exciting.
Hey, if somebody said I like your black hair, I would take it, even if it's not, you know, even if it's genetic. Like you can still appreciate being recognized for something that's just maybe mechanical.
Well, it's funny because like I was complimented a long time ago on my eyes, and as I was walking away, I was like, shoot, I thought of a great comeback, was like, thanks, they're genetic. And then I haven't been complimented on my eyes since, or like anything physical since. That was years ago. So just like drat, I couldn't use my comeback.
Yeah.
But anyways, if someone compliments you, be like, thanks, it's genetic.
You're just holding that in your back pocket for when you need it. Yeah.
I think because of that, I'm not getting any compliments. But that's okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, usually people are like, just take the compliment, you know what I mean? So, but no, I think that I can definitely see how this shows up, and I'm glad that you were able to speak on it, because I definitely feel like I understand the channel and this specific gate more now.
Yeah, it's I want to say it's a doozy, but it's not. Like, it has its really nice side to it, but
Mhm. Like they all
inadequacy,
do.
the shadow is a doozy. But we
Yeah.
can move over to astrology.
Yeah,
Sorry, like, you're not getting our cute little faces on the screen. You're getting like the screen share for the most part. At least if you're listening, you don't mind if you're on Spotify, but for everyone else, our faces are probably tiny and in the corner. Anyways, this is the chart of the moment. Something coming up is that we're gonna have the full moon in Aries. And Sarah, that's on the 9th, right? Yeah, you said it's on the 9th.
on the 9th, yeah, October 9th,
Um,
which is in 4 days.
yeah, I already forgot what else. We looked at this before.
Oh
we
no,
started
so
recording.
okay, so I mean, there's the things that are happening like eminently is that there is the full moon on the 9th, and it's going to be 2 degrees off from a conjunction with Chiron. The moon will be, the sun, of course, will be in Libra, will be opposing Chiron. And something that me and Laura noticed while we were looking at this is that there's going to be a really nice grand air trine. Laura, do you want to just touch on how the grand air trine might manifest?
Sure. So the sun will be like around 16 degrees Libra. Saturn's at 18 degrees Aquarius, and Mars is at 21 degrees Gemini. And so grand trines are, I just think of Susan Miller because that's where I first heard about them. They're just like the planets getting along and like la-di-da merry-go-rounding in the sky. They're getting along and they're all on the same page. And oh shoot, there are certain planets that are friends and enemies and some that are like neutral to one another. Um, and I can't remember the relationship between Mars and Saturn off the top of my head, but next week I'll touch in on that after I look it up. But yeah, I can't remember. Oh gosh.
Well, Saturn
This
can
is how
ground.
inadequacy shows up. You forget things and then they don't come out when you need them.
Saturn is going to be grounding the energy of the Mars in Gemini, which, like, to be honest with you, I'm kind of looking forward to, because my Mars, I'm first of all, my Mars is in my perfected house. So my perfected house is the house that Gemini is in, which is my 8th house. And I'm having my Mars return. Well, I had it, but it's going to retrograde back over those degrees. And it's in my 8th house. And in traditional astrology, the 8th house is considered a house that you can't see the first house from. So what that means is that for me, my Mars in Gemini is my chart ruler, but it can't really see my first house, which in theory, in traditional astrology, would mean that sometimes there's just this lack of congruence between what my Mars is up to and what, like, me, the native, needs. And so I've been noticing, like, what I've been really noticing is like the 1156 channel, even though that's not related to the Mars in Gemini, but it's still the kind of mental energy of just like constantly wanting stimulus but never digesting anything. Very Mars and Gemini of this like constant need for more and more mental stuff to just like basically like be like shoveling into your brain without actually digesting it, integrating it, and moving on from it. It just becomes like this like kind of like 48, this huge well of all of this information that like you can't tell if it's like an intuition or if it's just like a TV show that you watched last night or something that you saw on Instagram, or, you know, whatever the thing is. So I'm actually looking forward to Saturn and Mars and Gemini having this relationship. And I guess it's been active, and maybe that's why I've been able to sleep a little bit more for the past few days. Although when I had my Mars return, exactly, I was not sleeping at all. So yeah, the Mars Saturn energy can like really help guide the energy of Mars so that it can be more not, I don't want to say linear, but more less spinning its wheels and more grounded behavior, even if we're still talking about all air signs right now. So it's still going to be mental no matter what. A person who actually has a grand air trine in their chart with Saturn, or not sure what planets are involved, but with Aquarius, Gemini, and Libra planets all trining, is Jordan Peterson, who's this like psychologist who like basically has gotten really famous because of the way that he uses discourse in popular culture to further certain beliefs of his. And he's, you know, he's a very popular, mentally super mental dude. So I feel like the energy is definitely mental.
I have a grand trine. It's not exact. I was like, I think that's me.
You
I
might.
have Saturn in Aquarius, I have Jupiter in Libra, and I have my South Node in Gemini. They're not, Saturn and Jupiter are more like in sync with one another, and the South Node is some degrees off, but I'm like, hey, I think that's me.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I mean, I don't necessarily use the South Node when I'm looking at things
Okay,
like,
yeah.
but at the same time, like I think that all of that mental energy, you know, like that Gemini, like all of the air energy, like that too feels very much again like the 48 of like all of the information. Like it's not just like some of the information, it's like all of the information, looking at it in every way. So oh, a light just went on. Well, we're getting close to the end because the sun's going down. But yeah, so just wanted to touch on someone in pop culture, and also someone very near and dear to this podcast who has a bunch of planets within the air signs. And so that is one thing that's happening during the full moon. And I feel like we should just touch on the way Chiron might show up with the full moon in Aries. And Laura, do you want to talk about the mythology of Chiron a little bit, or?
I can. I've written about it extensively before. Chiron's mythology is tied with Hercules. They're buddy. Chiron's a centaur, so he's half human, half horse. And he's always kind of resented his animalistic nature, even though it's part of him. It's like our shadow gene keys. Like it's a part of us and it gets in the way, and yet you can't avoid it. You can't do anything about it. It's just inherently a part of you. And so to combat that, he was a scholar. He studied medicine. He was a doctor. He was overly obsessed with the mental faculties of his human half to avoid, acknowledging his baser animal instincts. And he was out hanging out with his buddy Hercules in the woods. They're going hunting, and they kind of separated from one another in the process. And Hercules saw centaurs, the Chiron's legs, and mistook him for a wildebeest of some sort, an animal, and he shot him. However, Hercules was using what's the word? A dipped arrow. What's the word when you like spike it? Spiked arrow. When it was spiked with poison and lethal poison, and so Chiron was shot with something that should have killed him. However, Chiron was a god, and therefore he was immortal and he couldn't die. And so he was shot in his animal hindquarters, which were part of him that he resented. And it was his downfall. And it brought him so much agony because he was permanently in a state of dying, though he wouldn't die. And to finally find some peace, he agreed with a mortal. Don't know who it was. I don't know if it was a demigod or just a casual human being, but they agreed to exchange mortality and immortality so that Chiron could die in peace. And so he gave up his immortality so that he can, honor the fact that he's an animal and his animal side was shot and is dying. And so he died, and to commemorate him, I think that's the right word, Zeus/Jupiter put him in the sky as Sagittarius to immortalize him in a different way in the heavens. So that's the mythology behind Chiron. But in our personal lives, it shows up as our greatest wounds and our greatest insecurities, very strongly connecting with this gene key. And it's the stuff that we can't escape from, but it's inherently a part of us, our deepest wounds, and the stuff that we feel is our greatest shortcoming, and how we identify with our flaws. So it's a heavy planetary body, and within the full moon, our flaws and our insecurities might be popping up and showing up for us to face and integrate and heal and nurture. But in doing so, because Chiron was also a a medicine man. The meaning behind it is like, you can't ever heal yourself of whatever you have with Chiron, but you can become a grand teacher for others and help others process whatever your greatest flaw is. I'm not sure if you'll ever overcome it in your lifetime, but you can use it for the betterment of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I love all of that. That was really good information about Chiron. And it just like reminded me that Jupiter is also in Aries. And so like there's this inflammatory quality going on in Aries right now, while it's being also activated by just the sign in general being activated, because there's this obviously the Sun Earth dynamic going on. And I think that all of those themes could be themes that we may expect to come up around the full moon. And also potentially there may be themes that we're becoming more aware of what our greatest wounding is. There may be some awareness just to mix the meanings of what a full moon usually brings with everything Lora said about Chiron being the wounded healer, and this kind of dynamic relationship between the mind and the body, and remembering that they both are in existence, but not favoring one. Specifically not favoring the mind over the body, which is something we keep coming back to. This full moon, though, is going to be happening while the sun is in 57. What's the opposing key or gate to 57? If you don't know, that's okay. We can talk about it next week.
It'll take me 2 shakes. 51.
Okay, so it's going to be between 57 and 51 for the full moon. So we'll probably touch on that, how it landed, next week when we talk about the 57. But yeah, I mean, I like the energy of the full moon with the grand air trine, and with, even though it's with Chiron, just like the kind of comforting notion that like you don't have to live in confusion about what your wounding is, and you can, if you bring it into the light, it becomes less frightening. So thinking that maybe it could be a healing full moon. Everyone, of course, like we always say, it's going to hit everybody differently, but a girl can dream for positive outcomes. But yeah, I think that's the only thing I wanted to cover for the astrology. Is there anything else you want to touch on?
Yeah, just if we're your go-to astrologers and you rely on us for information, Mercury went direct this past week. So and it's not direct and going to go over all the degrees it retrograded. If you weren't aware. So when we mentioned the dates a while back, but if you're just listening now you know Mercury's direct.
Now you know. Shenanigans are kind of over, kind of not. Pluto's going direct too, but Mars is going retrograde. So we have, like we talked about last week with Mercury being the planet that's the translator, it's retrograde, or it's any type of intensity in its orbit is going to create more hijinks than probably the other planets. But yeah, it's direct, it's still in shadow. There's things to tie up likely and revisit, but it's moving over the degrees, and we'll be back going on its merry way through Libra and then into Scorpio in no time. So okay, yeah, I think that's it.
Last week you asked me what my thoughts were on Mars, but I figure we've been chatting for a while. Mars is going to continue to like be direct and then eventually go retrograde. So like we can talk about it in the coming weeks, but I came with a response.
Okay.
Prepared, but we can wait until next time.
No, I'm interested now.
Okay, sorry. I feel like with emotional people, you have to like warn them and like have them prepare and get excited for stuff at the same time. But then you always want to hear what I have to say. So I looked at my previous writings about Mars retrograde, and it wasn't anything necessarily astounding. If we look at the inferior planets, so Mercury and Venus, they behave similarly to the moon in the sense that when they are retrograde, when they're retrograde, there is a time when they're not visible. Is that right? I have to think about it logistically. If you think about just the moon and the earth and the sun. When the moon is between the earth and the sun, we can't see it because it's next to a really bright star, and the bright star kind of makes the moon invisible. And it's when the moon starts to separate from the sun in its orbit that we see a little crescent, we begin to see the light. And just like Mercury and Venus, when they're in that space between in between the earth and the sun, they're showing up as like little crescents, but that's when they're retrograde. That's when their energy is closest to us, with like gravity and like physical space. And so we're going to feel them most potently when they're retrograde. And if you look at the grand scheme of like all the other planets, when they're retrograde, they are on the far side of the earth from the sun, compared to like the inner point. So like kind of like a full moon is their position in relation to the earth and the sun when they're retrograde. But again, it's that point in their cycle when they're closest to the earth, and so they're most felt. The gravitational pull is the strongest, things like that. And those planets, because they never reach that new moon phase, so to speak, they bounce in luminescence. So they're like full, and then they go gibbous on either side. They don't ever really, I don't think they get to like the half quarter phase, not the half phase, but like the quarter moon phase. They're pretty
Venus
much
gets
illuminated
45 degrees away from the sun, so that's the farthest it gets is 45 degrees.
But I'm thinking in terms of like not a degree, but like if you're looking at the planet, how much of it is covered in light and how much of it is in shadow. I don't think any of them ever get like halfway dark. They're for the most part, they are illuminated, shining light on us, giving us their influence. And I thought of Mars in terms of human design. Mars, especially on the personality side, deals with mutation. It's how we bring change to our reality. It's where mutation comes from. And so I was thinking that with Mars retrograde, it's the ability to process changes more easily, to be able to embody mutation, whether that's like change happening, getting a new job, getting a new relationship, getting some sort of new experience, or a physical change or a genetic change, whatever is happening internally within you. Mars is that sort of mutation. And so I feel like the fact that it's closest to the earth and the most potent just accentuates its ability to manipulate our little reality and to bring about change and mutation. And that makes me want to look at the future to see like what's happening in 2027 when that moment comes. What is Mars going to be doing? Is Mars going to be in a position where it's, you know, bringing about mutation to its full potential? So this is my theory. But yeah, that's my response for you.
I love that
getting
theory.
into the dark. Sun is setting.
I love that theory for me. I'm like, yes, that feels really good compared to how I've been, again, like in the wee morning hours thinking about what it's going to be like to have Mars retrograding in my 8th house during my Mars return. But I think that is really well put. And I think that's a really wise piece of insight into the retrograde in a way that I don't think that we really look at or hear about Mars retrograding. So we're going to have to revisit that when we go through the full retrograde cycle and Mars is back going direct and over the degrees, and see what has changed or what's been shaken up or mutated in our reality. But yeah, I think that's a pretty good treatment of everything. Is there anything else you want to touch on?
No, and I still didn't remember that mysterious little piece of information I wanted to share at the beginning. Don't know what you don't get to know. Sorry, it's a secret.
You'll remember it as soon as we hang up the phone.
We'll
Yeah, but okay, sweet. All right, well then let's close up for the night. I think we probably went for about an hour and 15. So thank you everyone if you stuck around for the entirety of this episode. It is on Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube as well. If you want to follow along and you're listening to it on one of the podcasting sites, then just open it up in YouTube, Astro Alchemy Podcast on YouTube. As far as I'm concerned, if you want to reach out to me, you can find me on Instagram at Third Eye Kiss. And then you can also email me at thirdeyekissastrology@gmail.com if you have any questions, comments, concerns, want a reading, etc. Laura, would you like to give you some information about yourself?
First, shout out to our 2 subscribers. I mean, Sarah and I are the other 2, but like, hello, thanks for subscribing. You're great. We think you're cool. But if you want to reach out to me, you can do so at hello@lorazuanicastrology.com or www. Only 3, no 4 W's, www.lorazuanicastrology.com, which is in the description below on YouTube. So yeah, thanks for sticking around. It's been great talking at you. Tune in next week to hear more. Hope you have a great day.
Yep. Catch you guys next time.
Wait, it's going to take me a second to stop recording because we were screen sharing. Okay, bye everyone.